Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Christian Educational Ministries Weekend Bible Study. And thank you, Ron, for that introduction. It's good hearing you every Friday night. Last week, we actually began going through the book of Daniel, and we got all the way to verse 4. If you were online with us, you'll recall that I was equivocating over something that probably wasn't all that important in the overall scheme of things, or in the overall thrust of Daniel's book. But surely it would have been important to Daniel and his friends, and that was this. Were Daniel and his friends eunuchs? The historian Josephus assumes they were eunuchs. However, other commentaries don't ascribe to that notion. I have to admit that I still don't think that they were eunuchs. And here's something else to consider. If they remained celibate and never married, maybe it was because there were no nice Jewish girls there who could have shared their beliefs. Knowing that they had impeccable character and very high morals, I doubt very seriously if they would have even considered having a relationship with any of the Chaldean women. And that would have been utterly contrary to the principle of being unequally yoked with someone of completely different religious beliefs and customs. But we're dealing with imponderables here, and since we're not told anything definitive, we have to just accept the fact that this is going to have to remain an unresolved issue. So let's move on to verse 5 of the first chapter of Daniel. Verse 5, the king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. This could have been heady stuff for the 4 teenagers. And the king knew exactly what he was doing here because he wanted to win them over. He wanted the boys to forget about home and start enjoying the comforts and pleasures and luxuries of Babylon. He was appealing to several human weaknesses or temptations by plying them with the regal delicacies that only a king could offer. These temptations were the same basic temptations Satan used against Eve in the garden and against Jesus during his 40-day fast in the wilderness. They're the same basic temptations that all mankind has been subjected to from the very beginning. They're the lust of the flesh, or instant gratification, the lust of the eyes, or greed, and the pride of life, or self-glorification. It boiled down to this. They were given the opportunity to partake of the king's finest cuisine and libations, and that appealed to the lust of the flesh, to be gratified by the delectable food. Being offered the king's food meant being offered the power and the prestige of eating from the king's table. And all they had to do was compromise with God's dietary laws and go along with everybody else. That appealed to the lust of the eyes. Thirdly, eating the king's food would have been an act of seeking the king's approval in order to have high self-esteem, and that might have filled them with pride. Nebuchadnezzar was making a large investment in these boys, and if they were ever going to be able to serve the king, they'd have to fit in. They'd need to be enmeshed in the lifestyle fitting an attendant of the king's court. So, one of the first things the king did was to see that they'd have access to the finest menu in the world. The last part of verse 5 says their time in training was going to be 3 years. No doubt this was going to be filled with all things Chaldean, including learning the language, the sciences, history, and all the protocols necessary to operate and excel at the highest threshold of Babylonians' ruling class. The purpose of this regal finishing school was not only to prepare them for service in the king's court, but also to erase or marginalize the ideology they'd learned in their former finishing school in Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar wanted to change their current way of thinking and cause them to start thinking with a Chaldean frame of mind. That being said, though, the king did have a need of occasional counsel and advice from a Jewish perspective, since he was still dealing with those in Jerusalem as well as other Jews in captivity. Now verse 6. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 6 indicates that there were other men or young men of other countries also here, maybe from some of the other vassal states that Nebuchadnezzar had overthrown. Verse 7, the chief official gave them new names, to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. Names in the ancient times often showed ownership, and by changing their names meant that they now belonged to Nebuchadnezzar, and he could name them whatever he wanted to. The chief official, aka the chief eunuch Ashpenaz, was the one who gave them the new names. This was one of the first steps to turn them into Chaldeans. When you look at Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah's names, you see the abbreviated names of God, El for God, and Ayah for Yahweh. Daniel means, God is my judge, and his name was changed to Belteshazzar, which means, the God Bel favors. Hananiah means, beloved of Yahweh, and his name was changed to Shadrach, which means, illuminated by the sun god. Mishael means, who is as God, and his name was changed to Meshach, which means, who is what the moon god is. Azariah means, Yahweh is my help, and his name was changed to Abednego, which means, servant of Nebo/Marduk. These new names showed that they now belonged to the Babylonian gods, and their new names would be a constant reminder of these foreign pagan gods. This was just part of the brainwashing program Nebuchadnezzar employed to wash away all the vestiges of their former lives. But they were young men of character and high morals, and they wouldn't be swayed by the luxury and prestige of their new surroundings. They remained faithful to God. Verse 8, but Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. This was a big deal for the boys. It's Daniel's first recorded test. Not that there weren't others, but this was big. And they were on their own now, no longer under the watchful eye of their parent or royal tutors. They had free rein, and furthermore, they were fully expected to put away their old ways and participate in the new order of doing things. So it was up to them. They had to decide if they were going to do the right thing. I'd like to read a couple of paragraphs from a site called Decoding Daniel that illustrates the gravity of this trial, and it suggests what may have been going on in their heads during this temptation. Quote, often the adversary's temptations are the same. His methods and packaging of temptation may vary. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil, Matthew 4:1. God had placed Eve in a beautiful garden and allowed the devil to beguile her. Now Yahweh had brought Daniel and his 3 friends to the magnificent palaces of Babylon to be tempted by the deceiver. Consider the difficulty of this test. 1. The king ordered a menu that violated God's law. The inexperienced youths would have to stand firm against the most powerful adult who ever lived. Number 2, disobedience meant severe punishment. Obedience to the king's orders would please everyone but God. 3, disobedience, even if not punished, could work to their disadvantage in respect to future positions. 4, the king's menu appealed strongly to the natural appetites of the 4 young men. 5, there would be the temptation to reason this way: God has not been good to us. Why should we be faithful to his laws? We were taught to obey those in authority, so let's obey King Nebuchadnezzar. Under normal circumstances, God's law is to be obeyed, but we're in abnormal circumstances. Mom and Dad will never know. We're far away from home. Who would ever know? And hey, we're only kids. Still quoting, "These teenagers knew what was right and good under God's law and its consequences. Anyone then who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it sins." James 2:4. Their decision not to sin was wise in God's eyes, and he would add to their wisdom. Temptations are tests. When Satan tempts one to sin, God tests that person for faith. James 1:2-12 offers insights into the dual temptation and testing of these youths. Nebuchadnezzar was as much an instrument of the devil as he was of God. His motives were worldly, and his methods were shrewd attempts to solicit the goodwill of the youths, to maintain and develop healthy bodies for his service, to convert them to his religion, and to make them into magnificent statesmen. The youths were to be indispensable assets in building his new empire, and God planned to help him." End quote. Now, despite his young age, notice how Daniel maturely handled this situation. Quote, "And he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way." End quote. He didn't cause a big scene or make demands. He took the matter up quietly and discreetly and asked the official permission to have a special diet. And this might be a good place to take a short break, and we'll be right back. Okay, verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. And once again, we're not told if there was any particular reason the head official liked Daniel. We're just told God caused it. But it must have had something to do with Daniel's demeanor as well. I don't think he would have found pity and compassion if he had behaved badly or was a terrible example. He probably was very likable, even though he and his friends were hostages and had every right and reason to be hostile and belligerent. The King James Version translates verse 9 like this: "Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs." Strong's Concordance renders tender love to mean that he had great compassion or pity for Daniel. And maybe that was because of all of the things he'd recently been through. This was similar to what happened with Joseph shortly after his brothers sold him into slavery. Notice what it says about Joseph in Genesis 39. Genesis 39, verse 21. "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." Joseph and Daniel had some things in common. They both had every reason in the world to be really angry about their situation. And they didn't know how their lives were going to turn out. But they hung in there and made the best out of the given situations. Also check out this verse in Proverbs. Proverbs 16:7. Proverbs 16:7. "When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes his enemies to be at peace with him." And that proverb says it all about Daniel and Joseph and so many others who lived according to God's will. And just one more scripture in keeping with this theme. Romans 8:31. "What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us?" Now verse 10. "But the official told Daniel, 'I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you.'" Ashpenaz liked and respected Daniel, but he feared Nebuchadnezzar. He feared for his life if anything should change in their handsome and healthy appearances. Daniel was polite and respectful, but he was persistent, and he feared Yahweh more than he feared the king. For Daniel and his friends, it wasn't just the likelihood that much of the king's food was unclean according to God's dietary laws. There was also the probability that the food and wine may have been dedicated to the local pagan gods that they were now named after. They knew in their hearts that they must obey God rather than men, so Daniel respectfully made a conditional proposition. But it wasn't with Ashpenaz, the chief official or chief eunuch. Up to now, this conversation has been between Daniel and Ashpenaz, but apparently this is where the conversation ends. Ashpenaz didn't want to jeopardize his position or disobey his orders from the king. So Daniel and the boys were turned down by the chief official, but they didn't give up. Now look at verse 11. This is a new conversation, and it's not with the chief official, Ashpenaz. It's with the guard. Notice verse 11. Daniel said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel wasn't successful in persuading Ashpenaz to change their diet, so he made his pitch to the guard, no doubt without the chief official's knowledge. Verse 12. Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Verse 13. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. Verse 14. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. This was a fait accompli of sorts. They successfully got over this food hurdle, and they were absolutely confident what the results of this 10-day experiment would be. Something tells me this wasn't the first time they ever embarked on this exercise. Verse 15. At the end of 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Now, some commentators hold to the belief that God must have intervened in this 10-day ordeal in order to keep them even healthier than the rest of the students. And maybe he did, because this regimen may have lasted all 3 years of their schooling. But I'm thinking those same commentators may not be all that familiar with the health benefits of fasting or modified fasting. Some people might not consider this to be a fast in the strict sense of the word, but there are any number of fasts that people engage in for all sorts of reasons. Some of those reasons include good health. Now, it's not my purpose here to analyze the healthful benefits of fasting, but the diet that Daniel and his friends did has become known to hundreds of thousands of people around the world as the Daniel fast. Do some Googling. I just Googled the Daniel fast, and I got 71 million results. And here's how one of the websites describes it. What is the Daniel fast? It says, the Daniel fast is a biblically based partial fast. It's a method of fasting that men and women and young people all over the world are using as they enter into the spiritual discipline of prayer and fasting. There are 2 anchoring scriptures for the Daniel fast. In Daniel 1, the prophet only ate vegetables. That would have included fruits, and drank only water. So from these scriptures, we get 2 of the guidelines for the fast. Eat only fruits and vegetables, and only drink water for a beverage. Then in Daniel 10, we read that the prophet ate no meat or any precious breads or foods, and he drank no wine for 21 days. Well, this so-called Daniel fast is actually a combination of the fast in the first chapter of Daniel and the fast in Daniel 10. So it basically goes like this. For 21 days, you eat only fruits and veggies and drink water. You don't eat meat or sweets or drink any alcohol. That's just one site, and there's a whole lot of information out there on this. Look into it and consider doing it once in a while, maybe at the first of the year. It's a good way to start the first of the year, both physically and spiritually. Try and give it a shot sometime. Verse 16. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they had to drink and gave them vegetables instead. Verse 17. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. I'd like to read what the Gill commentary has to say about this part of verse 17. I think it's a beautifully written description. As for these 4 children, God gave them knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom. As they prospered in their bodies, they succeeded in their studies and improved in their minds and became great proficients in all kind of lawful and useful knowledge, not owing so much to their own sagacity and diligence and the goodness and ability of their teachers as to the blessings of God on their instructions and studies. For as all natural, so all acquired parts are to be ascribed to God, and which these were favored by him in a very great manner to answer some questions of his. This is to be understood not of magic art, vain philosophy, judicial astrology, to which the Chaldeans were addicted, but of learning and wisdom, laudable and useful, both in things natural and political. For these men who scrupled eating and drinking what came from the king's table would never indulge themselves in the study of vain, curious, and unlawful knowledge. Much less would God have blessed the study of such things, and still less be said to give them knowledge and skill therein. And the last part of verse 17 says, "And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds." Again, the Gill commentary says this, "And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams, besides knowledge and skill in all learning and wisdom, in language and sciences. In common with the other young men, he had the honor of seeing such remarkable visions of future things and of interpreting dreams, and this not by rules of art, such as the Onirocritics use, but by the gift of God, of which many singular instances follow in this book." End quote. Verse 18. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. So 3 years of intense study is now behind them, and it's time for their final exam. It was going to be an oral exam, and it would be conducted by none other than King Nebuchadnezzar. This was a big day for Daniel and the boys, and it was a big day for the king as well. King had invested a great deal of time and money on this project. The regal pomp and circumstance of the most powerful man on earth in the grandest of cities must have been something to see and experience for the 4 boys. At this point, they have to know in their hearts they've done quite well. Still, the final acceptance was up to the king, and the intimidation factor must have been unprecedented. It's difficult for us to imagine what this graduate school was like. They were already well educated, and they were probably tutored by the best that Jerusalem had to offer because of their royal heritage. But this was an all-new ball game. Once they mastered the Chaldean language, they had to master all things Chaldean, including the religion and all of the pagan deities. The website decodingdaniel.com has this to say about some of the things they learned in these 3 years. And quote, "Science began in Egypt and Babylon with the birth of mathematics, metallurgy, anatomy, and astronomy. To the Babylonians we owe the exact measurements of the lunar and solar cycles, the tracing of the paths of the planets, the division of the circle into 360 degrees, and the designation of constellations, notably those of the zodiac. Daniel was no doubt trained in all these sciences. Daniel learned many language skills. The students would have learned the letters of the Chaldeans, a form of cuneiform or wedge-shaped script used throughout Mesopotamia. Mastering this form of writing was a long and difficult process, which only professional scribes and scholars learned. The language of the Chaldeans was Sumerian, the ancient language of Mesopotamia, which was used as the language of religion and learning, just as Latin was preserved as the language of liturgy in the Roman Catholic tradition." End quote. It's probably safe to conclude that they were subjected to a great deal of propaganda in that intense 3-year training period in order to convert them into full-fledged Chaldeans. If that was part of the training, it didn't work, because Daniel and the boys remained ever faithful to God in everything they did. Verse 19, "The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, so they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. So they graduated with full honors, you might say." Daniel really did have a lot in common with Joseph. They came from very prominent families. Daniel probably had a better education than Joseph early on, but like Daniel, Joseph received the best education Egypt could give him when he was still a young man. Both of them were thrown into slavery when they were very young, and the Lord found favor on both of them. Their captors liked and trusted them, and they even had a great deal of affection for them. They both had the gift of interpreting dreams, but it was God who did the interpretations, of course, and they were always quick to give God the credit. And they both became second in command of world-ruling countries. There are quite a few examples in the Bible of God using young people who accomplished a lot at a very young age. Samuel started serving in his ministry when he was around 5 or 6 years old. David was just a teenager when he killed Goliath, and prior to that, he was a very responsible shepherd who handily killed a bear and a lion to protect his flocks. Josiah was only 8 when he began to reign as king of Judah. And Jesus was confounding the doctors of the law in the temple when he was only 12. It's interesting to note that throughout history, kids were expected to learn and accomplish things at early ages. In early America, kids began to read at very young ages because they were expected to. Parents exposed them to the Bible, and that was generally their first textbook. They were expected to be productive while learning as much as possible about as many things as possible when they were young, even very young. Noah Webster, of dictionary and textbook fame, understood that, quote, students are capable of much more than what is often believed today. History consistently shows that if we raise expectations, students will rise to meet them. But if we lower expectations, they will also meet those. End quote. Now, that was a quote from David Barton in an article that was on page 442 of the Founders Bible, and the article was titled, Unleash Your Children to Greatness. In a letter to his wife Abigail, John Adams wrote this, It should be your care, therefore, and mine, to elevate the minds of our children with an ambition to excel in every capacity, faculty, and virtue. If we suffer their minds to grovel and creep in infancy, they will grovel all their lives. End quote. And of course, their son John Quincy Adams became our 6th president. Our society doesn't place those kinds of high expectations on the youth anymore, but we can do that individually as we raise our kids and grandkids. Daniel's parents and the parents of his 3 friends put high expectations on these boys. And at some point, they put high expectations on themselves because they knew they had to succeed. They owed it to their families to succeed. They owed it to Nebuchadnezzar. And most importantly, they owed it to God. Verse 21, And Daniel remained there until the 1st year of King Cyrus. There's a span of about 67 years between verse 20 and verse 21, much of which Daniel doesn't tell us. But Daniel does write about what God wanted us to know, and we'll find out more about those events as we traverse the rest of the book. But this is a good stopping point for tonight, and we'll get on to chapter 2 next week. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to come back next week. Jot me a note with your questions or comments at rich@borntowin.net, and be sure to let us know where you live. Good night, everyone.